Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app. O'Connor and Company.
It's 5:06. It's Wednesday morning. Thanks for tuning in here. It's our last in-studio day, as tomorrow we'll be live from Media Row at CPAC. Although, if history maintains its pattern, it'll sound about the same because usually when we start our show, no one's there. Do you realize, Julie Gunlock, we're like the only show nationwide that starts as early as 5 in the morning?
I am aware, painfully.
It's because of our dedicated listeners. You know how many people tune in right here at this moment to hear me introduce the guests later in the show that they probably won't listen to because they'll already be at work?
Quite a few, I imagine.
Let me tell them. At 6:35, Cal Thomas will be here. Actually, you should tune back in. That's why I tell you all of this. So you can, grab the beginning of the show, and then it's like, oh, my God, Cal Thomas in an hour and a half? I got to hear that. And then you tune back in for Cal Thomas. Do you think?
That's right. It's
okay.
Perfect.
Then at 7:05, Representative Laurel Libby out of Maine. She's got an amazing story. They're still letting dudes compete in high school girls' sports up there in Maine. We're going to talk about that. 7:35, Daniel Elwell, and at 8:05, Eric Stewart. Now, Eric Stewart is a local real estate guru. You keep hearing this story all over the place about, Doge and Trump is ruining the real estate market here in D.C. Everyone, you may be a Republican in Washington, but they're harming you with your home price. That's actually not true. I know it's shocking to hear that the media is lying.
We would
to
love
you.
it if a few Democrats would take a hike, but
yes. That's coming up. I failed to mention Daniel Elwell is a former acting administrator of the FAA. We're going to talk about that latest plane crash in Toronto. The media loves to talk about this. They're loving to talk about it. Apparently, there was a small plane crash in Georgia. We talked about this. This is why I don't fly on small planes. We had this conversation yesterday. People, as soon as this Delta plane crashed in Toronto, libs everywhere. Well, this is Trump's fault, the FAA. And then it had to be pointed out that, well, of course, Toronto is not yet under the jurisdiction of Donald Trump. Right. And so then they had to concede. And by the way, air traffic control is privatized in Canada.
Yes.
Right? So then they said, oh, no, I wasn't talking about that. I was talking about the small plane crash in Georgia. Didn't you see that one, the small plane crash? Well, then you do a little bit of digging to the Covington County Airport in Georgia, and it turns out that is a small craft airport that literally has no air traffic control tower. Also not under the jurisdiction of the FAA or Donald Trump, but it doesn't matter. Listen to this. On CNN, they turned to their aviation expert. This is a guy who, his whole job is to give them facts about aviation when there's a tragedy.
Did he?
So he did. He gave the facts, and then listen to what Dana Bash does after she has the facts.
This is happening against the backdrop of massive cuts across the federal government, including at the FAA. Just going to put some up on the screen. Hundreds of FAA employees have been laid off as part of Elon Musk going through all the federal agencies. And then beyond the FAA, we have 10% of the CDC workforce, 3,400 at the U.S. Forest Service, 2,200 at the Interior Department, 2,000 at the Department of Energy.
The Forest Service may have more to do with this crash in Toronto. Right? So and again, the language used here.
This is happening against the backdrop.
It's against the backdrop. The backdrop, it's in a whole other theater, honey.
Yeah.
It's like it's in downtown off-Broadway. What do you mean backdrop? Here's what she heard right before she did that and talked about the backdrop of Elon Musk and Donald Trump's cuts. This is what the aviation expert had to say.
Pete, thank you. We're extremely lucky to have you with us. Explain everything to us. Talk to you soon. I'm back here with our fantastic...
Sorry, I thought we actually had his response, but that was her saying, oh, thank you, Pete. Thank you so much.
You're fired because he didn't give the answer, right? You can imagine. I wonder if she threw a stapler or a binder.
Thank you, Pete. You know what? Leave your resume with the janitor. He'll know what to do with it. So this is the narrative that they have to have, that they demand to have, and this is why people don't watch them anymore. It was like there was an additional little exchange with Stephen Miller and Breanne Keeler on CNN, not having to do with this, but having to do with the cuts. And it's just they have their narrative.
Yep.
They have the story that they want to tell, and then when they have facts that disrupt that, it doesn't stop them. They just continue with their narrative.
My organization, Independent Women's Forum, has done research into how to reach people, how to message, with the best way to message. And this is not new. This is research that's been done by other organizations, but it's, sort of on attention span. There's like people listen for 4 seconds or they read like 7 words and then move on. And it's kind of depressing, to be honest with you, especially if you're in the business of writing op-eds or you books. But you get the sense that they don't have attention spans enough to read something thoroughly and to really research an issue. Because again, I always feel like when I watch these shows or I see them talking, it's like one of those, well, if you get to the 7th paragraph in the article, you'll see reassuring information, or you'll see that this stuff has been debunked. They never get that far. They never do. They just, as you said, they just have those talking points. They're going to drive that home no matter what the issue is.
Here's another example on NBC News as they were reporting on the crash. Again, in Toronto, Canada.
This is going to yet again raise the concern about FAA staffing, air traffic control.
Why will this? By the way, the crash in Toronto also had nothing to do with air traffic control.
Right, wind.
It had wind and icy conditions and snow that had just been. Mika Brzezinski.
Everyone on board survived after a Delta jet flipped over on the runway. It comes as the Trump administration continues its move to gut the federal workforce.
Gut.
But also,
anyone who's lost their job right now in the federal workforce has only been on the job for less than a year, right? It's all probationary employees.
That's the thing, is the Trump administration came out with a response here saying that everybody who was let go had nothing to do with safety, had nothing to do with air traffic control.
They're gutting it, Julie.
They were temporary employees who are deemed unnecessary. They're more administrative. They are not in that realm of keeping the planes in the air. But it doesn't matter. Yeah. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They have their talking point.
So let's see. This comes as Trump guts. This will raise concerns about FAA. This happens with the backdrop of Trump cutting. Let's see if local news does it any differently.
This latest aviation incident comes on the heels of the Trump administration.
Oh, on the heels.
On the heels. That's a new one.
That is. At least they came up with a different sort
That's
of,
true.
what is
Well
that, a
done.
simile, an analogy, a metaphor. You got your heels. All right. And then what about up in Toronto? Well, they're part of the Commonwealth. So, they've got their Canadian Broadcasting Company. But because this video, this is what drives me crazy. This should be cable news gold. Instead, they turn it into an anti-Trump diatribe, which, of course, alienates over half of their viewers. Over half, 80% right now.
You know what it drives them to? What it drives people to? X.
Yeah,
you could get some really interesting analysis.
Us. X and us.
Yes.
Yeah. But they could be telling incredible tales about the crew on that plane that got people out.
And the upside down
plane.
upside down. They have video of this.
And nobody died. It's one of the greatest stories they could be telling on cable news. So let's look across the pond. BBC, they covered it because this is an international story because of the visuals involved. So what did the BBC say?
One of the things that is kind of amazing here is that no one died in this crash, despite the fact that this plane was literally flipped on its head and the wings were torn off. One of the things that people are talking a lot about this morning is this question from the general public in the U.S. around whether flying is safe. And the experts are saying that nothing really has changed from an administrative level, from a regulatory level, that would have impacted air safety. And so they're saying that, despite these very high profile, very scary and very tragic events, that flying is safe. At the same time, though, we do know that the Trump administration is cleaning house.
At the same time,
Just had to put that in.
At the same time, though.
Yes.
Well, that's better than but.
Yeah.
Or on the heels of.
Right.
Or in the background of.
Yeah,
or,
at least he put the good stuff first.
Yeah. It's 5:15. WMAL traffic and weather every 10 minutes. First on the 5s. Jamie Whitten is in the Hadid carpet cleaning traffic.
WMAL, making sense of the news.
And in our studio, it's the temperature of the surface of the sun.
I'm dying.
I say it's 21 degrees outside, and Julie goes, "Oh my God!"
I'm gonna go broadcast from outside. I'll be on the roof.
It's 97 in the studio. It is. This studio is either it's either a like
box.
walk-in freezer at a restaurant where there's sides of beef hanging for next season.
I always want to just turn around and go home when it's a hot day. I can't do this to a woman my age.
I understand. All right. So anyway, the media is trying to spin this, and it still continues to be a narrative, but it transcends the FAA. But that seems to be the thing. All this stuff is focus group tested. They know. They know that, when you start asking the American people about the cuts in government, they're all like, rah, rah, yes, we agree. We got to do this. Let's do this. Finally, someone's doing it.
Yes, they're desperate to show.
So they got to scare people.
Yes.
They got to come up with something. And so now it's like Pete Buttigieg, like 5 times a day he's tweeting about air transportation safety, where he was missing in action the entire time he was Secretary of Transportation. There's also this, everybody's a lot of people pull up this clip of Pete Buttigieg talking about near misses. There was a string of near misses of near collisions in 2023, right? And during that entire exchange about near misses at the time, summit happened here in Washington, D.C., there was a lot of discussion about, well, what do we need to do? What can we do? And Julie, and you can pull up, I'll find a clip for you in a second. I had it a second ago, where people were talking at that time in 2023 about these near misses, and they said, well, there's a lot of things we can do. In fact, we've had proposals on the table for 20 years.
That's right.
To stop these things from happening, and no one has ever done anything. And why is that? Because people don't appropriate. This all has to come from Congress. And nobody wins re-election going back to their district saying, I made sure that we had enough money to upgrade the air traffic control systems.
Well, and Thomas Massie has talked about this quite a bit. Apparently, he took a tour of Reagan National's tower, and he was shocked by what he said. It looked like they were playing hangman on an old computer, with green dots. And he was disturbed by that because this really is an antiquated system. I think it's from the 60s. And, he said part of the reason there is hesitancy to totally redo this system and modernize it is because, we're talking about airplanes and, and we don't want some sort of major air disaster. The thing, though, is, you can create a new system, test a new system while using the old system. I mean, all of this stuff has been done. Think of Y2K. Remember that, Larry? Mm-hmm. Remember?
Sure.
All the drama. These things and we were really forced to face that issue. Yeah. All of these things can be dealt with, but it is in Washington, and this is what makes me so excited about DOGE. I have been in this town for nearly 30 years, and they've been, the phrase kicking the can down the road, they've been doing that the entire time. Everybody's going, I'm going to clean things up. I'm going to, waste, fraud, and abuse. It's all a lie, right? They're finally doing it.
So let me ask you a question. Who just as an entity, who would suffer more from rampant mid-air collisions and rampant airline crashes? Who would that hurt more, just in terms of, obviously, let's set aside the fact that people will die. Obviously, that's horrible. But just in terms of who has the interest to make sure flying is safe, the federal government or the airlines?
Right, yeah.
I mean, I think you can make the case that airlines have a vested interest in making sure that the American people feel safe when they get into an airplane, right? In other countries, air traffic control has been privatized. The airlines pool their money together. They make sure that they have a safe system to fly in. And guess what? That means that they spend more money to upgrade those systems and make sure those systems are cutting edge. The government, why is this suddenly a government function? And I know it was like, oh, well, those airlines will neglect air traffic control to cut costs. No, they're going to neglect, making sure that I have a comfortable seat to sit in.
Yeah.
They're going to neglect me getting peanuts.
Oh, yeah.
Because people are still going to fly if they don't get peanuts.
Yeah.
But they're not going to fly if they think they're going to crash.
Well, the same thing with TSA. Why in the world hasn't that? I mean, we should do away with it at this point. But, at some point, there was talk of privatizing it. Would have been a far better solution to that issue. There's an allergy to privatization in D.C., and there's a lot of money in funding these new agencies, brand new agencies. Republicans are just as bad, not just, but they're pretty bad.
Well,
about
I
this
remember
as well.
that fight coming after 9/11. There was the big fight to create the Department of Homeland Security, and there were some good Republican voices saying no.
There were also some good Democrat voices actually saying no.
Yeah.
It wasn't just Republicans at that point.
But that ended up being a big major compromise. I think it was Joe Lieberman in the middle of it who wanted to make it.
And he was really willing to listen. I worked on that committee.
I remember.
And he was willing to listen to those arguments. But honestly, the big government folks, and that's Republicans and Democrats won out. The establishment essentially won out at the end. And everybody who said, maybe we should slow roll this. Look, maybe this shouldn't be this big behemoth new agency. We're called, they were accused of not caring about the security.
Right.
It was the fever of 9/11, and these people were accused of really not caring and not wanting to make America safe.
It's 5:23.
Now on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app. O'Connor and Company.
5:37 here as we chug along on this Wednesday morning. Thanks for joining us. At 6:35, Cal Thomas will be here. It's 7:05, Congressman Laurel, there's an L at the end of that, Laurel Libby from Maine will discuss men and women's sports because we've seen the latest example up there in her state of Maine. 7:35, Daniel Elwell, formerly of the FAA, and then at 8:05, Eric Stewart, talk about what's really going on with the local real estate market. It's not what you're hearing in most news outlets. That's all coming up. It's Larry O'Connor with Julie Gunlock. Good morning, Julie.
Good morning.
It is a pretty horrible day here as it's a mixed day, to tell you the truth. I'm sorry. I feel horrible because we're learning of some of the hostages that Hamas had held against their will, obviously, since October 7th, who died while in captivity. They were murdered by Hamas. And at the same time, we're also getting some other living hostages released. So it's like I'm seeing these images of these hostages returning home, seeing their family. I'm weeping with joy for that family. And then I find out that 4 bodies have been turned over, and I'm weeping in grief for those families.
I know. Both of us are having a hard time. The 4 deceased hostages are going to be released tomorrow. 6 living hostages on Saturday.
And that's the language ABC News used. 4 deceased hostages.
Oh,
and
I
it's
know.
like,
You're
I'm
right.
sorry, deceased?
I know, yes.
You're using that because that's where we're reading the headline to make a point.
No, yeah.
ABC News couldn't bring themselves to say that these 4 individuals were murdered by Hamas. They're deceased. What can we tell you? They were hostages and now they died.
And it wasn't just ABC. I mean, Caitlin Collins over at CNN and a number of other people were saying, deceased or dead or, any variation except for murdered and kidnapped. I was expecting someone to say they've passed.
Yeah,
gentle
exactly.
language.
They passed away. These things happen. It's disgusting. And it brings up so much. We were talking about this just moments ago before we come on the air, that you immediately thought at the same time of Columbia University and UCLA and all of these colleges and these protests that were funded by organizations linked to the terrorists. Then you think about the Biden administration giving pallets of cash to the Iranian regime to help pay for this
Let's
stuff.
talk about more locally. GW, George Mason, Alexandria City High School had a walkout where those kids using school bullhorns were screaming from the river to the sea. Did those school officials go in and explain to those kids what that means? Yeah. That's genocidal talk? No. Let's just give everybody a pat on the back for walking out of school and repeating this anti-Jewish, anti-Israel rhetoric. It's disgusting.
This horrific story, though, of Kafir and Ariel Bibas, a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. The 2-year-old, Kafir, was 9 months old.
9 months old.
On October 7th. Hamas, you think about Hamas, you think about the evil mentality of these monsters who went through and slaughtered people indiscriminately, of course, raping whatever as they go. And then they start to take hostages, and they see a mother with a 9-month-old baby and a 1-year-old baby, or 1.5-year-old baby, or I'm sorry, a 2-year-old baby. I'm getting all freaked out by this.
I know.
And they decide, we're taking you too. You with the 9-month-old baby. You come with us. We're going to, and all 3 of them are dead, the mother and the children.
I think it's important to say, though, that now, listen, I'm about to make a distinction here, but I think it is important. They were kidnapped by Gazan civilians that went into that community, that sort of, kibbutz, and they were kidnapped and handed over to civilians, Gazans. So Hamas is 100% responsible, of course, for all of this. But they were kidnapped and likely killed by civilians who had kidnapped them. I think that's an important distinction because everyone's like, everybody in Gaza is just innocent. No, there's some really bad people, including the people who killed this family, this mother and her 2 children.
There's still, I believe, one remaining American hostage at this point.
Yes.
And a handful of Israeli hostages. And by the way, this is why Hamas has not. Hamas wants to extract every possible concession they can before they reveal just how horrific the hostage situation has been, and that's why we're just learning about it now. That's why they're trying to bury the news as much as possible. It's heartbreaking. Yet at the same time, again, mixed emotions because you see the reunion of the living hostages that have been released with their families, and the fact that these brave people have been praying this whole time for this moment to arrive, and it has now finally.
I will tell you, though, Larry, that the release of those hostages more recently, they've obviously starved these people.
Oh, yeah.
They have obviously done things. There was a couple of young women who are missing fingers. Some of the men can't move their arms. They're limping.
Oh, yeah.
There was some serious torture going on.
Yeah, and when you think that the state of Israel was founded on the simple notion that they could never let the Holocaust happen again, we don't want to see concentration camps ever happen again. The Jewish people deserve to have their own homeland and their own nation so that they can be safe and protected. And you see then these hostages being released looking like they just stepped off from Auschwitz.
That's right.
Looking exactly the reason why we have Israel in the first place. It's horrific. And part of me wants Trump to say, once all the hostages are released, I want Trump and Netanyahu to say, yeah, you know what? We're still going to break all hell out on you. Now, thanks for the hostages. Now hunker down because we're going to finish the job here. It's
9 a.m. on WMAL.
Pope Francis needs your prayers this morning as he is in the hospital with double pneumonia in both lungs. One of his lungs, apparently, he's already had one of the upper lobes of his right lung removed back decades ago when he was a young man.
Wow.
So he's already got debilitated breathing capabilities. He's now been upped onto a more robust cortisone antibiotic treatment. Although we're told this morning out of Rome that he did wake up and eat breakfast. That's a good sign. That's a good sign. Yeah. But he is definitely in failing health as this week develops now. He began with bronchitis earlier in the week, and then that has led to pneumonia, and now that pneumonia has spread to both lungs. According to this report, Francis is not known to be using supplemental oxygen, and he did, again, as I mentioned, eat breakfast today. He reads the newspapers, and he's done some work from his hospital room. So far, no statements about the sinfulness of driving an internal combustion engine. So that's a good sign as well. Sorry, you got to make a joke now and again. This has been an extraordinary pontificate.
It has.
Let's just say. And
I'm gonna let you take this one, Larry, and I'm gonna avoid the lightning bolts here.
The Vatican has given no indication of how long the Pope might remain hospitalized, saying that the treatment is a complex clinical picture, is how they put it, and it will require an adequate stay. He's 88, I want to say. Is that right?
So, yeah.
88 years old.
My dad is not that old, but he is older, and whenever he gets any kind of cold, it takes forever. And you can really damage your lungs with pneumonia, repeated, cases of pneumonia or bronchitis, and so. I mean, it really, again, the older you get, the more, I'm not revealing.
No, you're right. In fact, my dad
really hard to fight off.
My dad is this old. In April, he'll be this old. He's 87 right now. He turns 88 in April. And also at this age, every little thing starts to be magnified.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
It's like, I can't imagine my dad right now, based on his physical condition, having to deal with the coughing, the volatile nature of a cough when you've got pneumonia in both lungs has got to be so painful and, frankly, debilitating for other bodily functions. This is what starts to happen.
If I cough to my mother, she immediately thinks I'm dying, right? And it's because it is a bigger deal for them to get a cold. So she reacts as if I'm more vulnerable. But yeah, this is tough.
Listen, the fact that the Pope Francis is not on oxygen yet is actually a good sign. And the fact that he's eating is actually a good sign for his health. And we shall see. And, of course, whenever something like this happens.
I mean, he's in Italy. I mean, I could be literally on my last breath and I would ask for some pasta. So maybe that's not just such a great sign. Maybe that's just the fact that he's in Italy.
That's true.
And he can't resist.
He's eating. That's a good sign. Well, yeah, so would I if I were in Rome. Obviously, whenever the Pope takes ill, there's always conversations about, well, what about the next Pope, which would be a little premature, I think, to enter into those conversations.
But we'll do it.
But I think we've all sort of been through. Listen, since Pope John Paul II, now this is we've been through the process. We saw the election of Pope Benedict, and then his extraordinary resignation while still alive, which is very rare
in retirement,
to occur, in his retirement, and then the election of Pope Francis. So we've sort of seen it several times in the last 15 years or 20 years. And yeah, there are 253 cardinals from all around the world, and should Pope Francis pass away, they would then converge on Rome. They would go into their conclave, as has just been depicted in an Oscar-nominated film.
Really bonkers show. It was so good up until the very end. I was like, "What?"
Yeah,
yeah.
Typical
I'm not
Hollywood.
gonna.
We can't spoil it.
I'm not going to spoil it.
Let's just say.
He's Luke's father. Okay.
Yeah. If you need to see it, don't watch Conclave. Don't.
No. Or you could watch 3/4 of it and turn it off.
Yeah, the end is pretty typical Hollywood BS. Anyway, out of the 253 cardinals, you need to get 138, and then you can be the Pope. There you go. No cardinals over the age of 80 can participate in the voting. Did you know that? Which is ironic. So if they had to vote for a new Pope today, the current Pope is ineligible to vote for himself, which is sort of weird. It's like Mitch McConnell. Come on, can we just? I'm okay with the resignation thing. I'm okay. I mean, I think Benedict was. I loved Pope Benedict. I thought one of the most brilliant theologians.
Well, he was. He was the
the last several centuries.
Absolutely.
And I think it was an incredibly selfless act for him to say, you know what, I can't function anymore at the level that I should function. And I think that's a smart thing for popes to do, to tell you the truth.
It will be. I don't know. I'm looking at this list, and I don't know much about any of these cardinals. But if you did watch Conclave, if you know about the process, there are factions of the Vatican.
Well, it's political.
And it's very political, and there are liberals, and there are conservatives, and there are different regions of the world, and it is very interesting, especially if you're into politics. It's very interesting. But there is someone interesting to me, Cardinal Fridolin
Mbongo Besungo.
You're very good at that, by the way. From the Republic of Congo.
Yeah.
And boy, the African Catholic Church is very conservative. So
it's very
maybe
conservative.
It's time.
It's also the fastest growing
faction
of the church.
Maybe it's time, Larry.
Well, it's past time. We've had African popes before. One comes to mind, Augustine.
Sure.
He was pretty good.
Sure.
Saintly almost. Oh, no, wait. And, what's funny is that you could actually play the whole DEI card against them for this. It's like, you know what? It's time. It's time for an African pope when really any pope.
I just want it more conservative.
Any pope from Africa will be more conservative than any pope from anywhere else in the world. He'll be a MAGA pope. And we'd be okay with that. It's 5:53.